The Washington, D.C. Transatlantic Policy Forum felt more like a cathedral than a conference hall. In the cavernous Ronald Reagan Building, crystal chandeliers spilled golden light over long rows of delegates, and economists in fine suits murmured in clusters. Diplomats from Europe and North America, meticulously turned out in silk scarves and perfectly knotted ties, flipped through glossy programs. At the center of it all stood a single lectern, its microphone catching every reflection of the stage lights. Behind it, a high-resolution digital map stretched across a large screen: trade routes, energy pipelines, economic indices, each line and color revealing the pulse of the Transatlantic Alliance. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, took the stage just after mid-morning. Barely 30, she bore the confidence of someone twice her age. Introduced with glowing praise by the forum chair, a distinguished former ambassador, she stepped forward in a charcoal gray pantsuit and crisp white blouse. Her hair was pulled back into a taut ponytail, her heels clicked sharply on the polished wood floor, and camera flashes erupted each time she moved. She paused, composed herself, and launched into her prepared remarks, praising U.S. leadership in global trade and security, extolling NATO's achievements, and acknowledging lingering economic ripples from Brexit. Her diction was precise, and her gaze swept the audience for 20 minutes as she spoke without hesitation, her words riding the hush of anticipation. As applause tapered off and she prepared to pivot to a discussion of new American steel and aluminum tariffs, she glanced at her notes, then allowed a subtle smile to slip across her face. The audience sensed a shift. Something unscripted was about to happen. "And of course," she said, scanning the front row until her eyes locked onto a familiar figure gazing back at her, "we must not overlook our friends to the north, although some might call Canada America's cold little cousin, an economy that's little more than a gas station with a flag." Silence fell instantly, and diplomats stiffened in their seats as conversation died on everyone's lips, and a low gasp rippled through the forum as if they had collectively swallowed ice. A few junior attendees stifled laughs, uncertain if they should be appalled or amused. The Canadian delegation, seated a few rows back, exchanged bewildered glances. Had they really just heard that? Leavitt leaned into the lectern, her smile widening, a trace of triumph and mischief. A handful of American aides near the back gave polite nods of approval, their press secretary staff, badges gleaming in the lamplight. But most of the room's faces registered shock as they recalled decades of post-Cold War alliance building. Quiet respect, mutual defense, shared values. Here was Leavitt, lampooning one of America's closest partners. Meanwhile, in the blink of an eye, Twitter ignited as a junior staffer in the front row, smartphone in hand, had recorded the remark. Within seconds, a 10-second loop of "gas station with a flag" was live online, and the hashtag Leavitt versus Canada began trending, turning a dignified policy forum into an instant viral spectacle. In that same front row sat Mark Carney, former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, now Canada's Liberal leader. He exuded calm authority, and at 62, his salt and pepper hair framed a face that had weathered global finance storms and quiet political battles alike. He wore a navy blue suit, a pinstripe tie, and rimless glasses. At Leavitt's barb, Carney closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and in his mind repeated a passage from Adam Smith: "Nations are not diminished by the prosperity of their neighbors." He did not flinch. Instead, he folded his hands, drawing on decades of center-stage experience. Leavitt pressed on for another minute, gesturing animatedly as she extolled President Trump's proposed auto tariffs, as if daring anyone to contradict her. Delegates murmured among themselves, scrolling on their phones, reading breaking news alerts. A German diplomat, an older gentleman with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, leaned across his neighbor and whispered, "I've never seen such a direct insult from a White House representative. Unprecedented." Leavitt concluded her talking points and exited with a crisp nod. The curtain rose to reveal her successor, Mark Carney. Applause greeted him, but it was polite, carrying more curiosity than enthusiasm as some American attendees shifted uneasily. Backstage, Leavitt's team buzzed urgently across text messages. "Carney's up next. Prepare for counter." Carney rose slowly, adjusting his jacket. He circled the lectern, glanced down at his notes, then met the audience, with even composure. Camera flashes popped as he settled behind the microphone. The room hushed, anticipation crackling like static in the air. "Good afternoon," he began, voice measured, almost conversational. "Thank you to the organizers of the Transatlantic Policy Forum for convening today's critical discussion on economic cooperation and security. I would also like to address some comments made earlier." A hush followed. Carney offered a brief nod, no scowl, no glower. Ms. Leavitt's words reflect a misunderstanding of strength. Diminishing Canada by calling it a gas station with a flag overlooks the full scope of our partnership. He paused, letting the silence linger. Then he shifted. According to 2024 U.S. trade data, Canada remains America's top trading partner. Bilateral goods and services trade reached $763 billion last year, over 17% of all U.S. trade. We supply energy to American households, cars that U.S. consumers drive off the lot, and jobs that span manufacturing, technology, and agriculture. A ripple of approval ran through the Canadian delegation, and a few Germans in the second row nodded, discreet but pointed. Carney continued. Canada's real GDP in 2024 was $2.1 trillion, ranking us 10th globally. To call us cold, or little, ignores a population of 38 million contributing to one of the world's most diversified and resilient economies, anchored by innovation in clean energy, robust natural resources, and groundbreaking research in life sciences. He clicked a remote in his hand, and a slide flickered onto the screen behind him. Canada, U.S. Trade Balance, 2015 to 2024. A chart appeared, each bar rising steadily. Carney pointed to the upward trajectory of Canadian energy exports to the United States. Even under President Trump's steel tariffs imposed in mid-2024, Canada's economy grew by 1.7%, according to a 2025 IMF report. That resilience is not evidence of a weak cousin, but of a partnership built on mutual interest and enduring trust. Applause followed, first a trickle, then a steady surge. Cameras flashed as Carney added a rhetorical flourish. "I'd like to quote John Stuart Mill. The worth of a state is the worth of the individuals composing it. Canada's people, engineers in Alberta refineries, doctors in Toronto hospitals, factory workers in Ontario, are our greatest assets. They stand shoulder to shoulder with their American neighbors." Leavitt sat in the front row. Her triumphant smile had vanished, and tension pressed her lips into a thin line. She raised a hand, as though to protest, but Carney did not waver. His gaze swept the room, journalists poised to write the next headline, diplomats watching with respect, American officials scribbling frantic notes. Then came his final, stinging lines. "Insults do not breed progress. Tariffs to prove a point risk harming your own people." A 2025 Congressional Budget Office report warns U.S. consumer prices could rise by $35 billion this year due to increased steel and aluminum costs. Harming your economy to demean your ally is not strength, it is folly. When he finished, the hall erupted in applause, a standing ovation led by Canadian dignitaries. European delegates joined in, some rising to their feet. A few American officials clapped, though a few chairs scraped, betraying discomfort among those who had earlier cheered Leavitt. Online, #CarneyClapsBack exploded. Clips of Carney's rebuttal racked up millions of views. Journalists pounded out headlines. Carney schools Leavitt on Canada's strength, quiet intelligence trumps bluster at Transatlantic Forum. Social media commentators dubbed him the quiet assassin. Behind closed doors, Leavitt's press team scrambled. In a cramped backstage room scattered with half-drunk water bottles and crumpled talking points, aides huddled around phones. The communications director hissed into a headset, "We need a counter-narrative. Spin it as an inside joke. Focus on trade deficits. Get an economic advisor to rebut." But Carney's words had already flooded every major outlet. Moments later, as Leavitt approached the moderator's table for a rebuttal, she brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. The moderator, a veteran EU diplomat, handed her the microphone. "Ms. Leavitt, would you like to respond?" She cleared her throat, voice tight. "I appreciate Mr. Carney's enthusiasm for statistics, but he is overlooking the real issue. Canada's trade deficit with the United States was $99 billion in 2024. A cousin bleeding us dry is still a burden, not a partner." Her frustration bubbled in her tone. Carney raised a hand, forestalling further sparring. "Ms. Leavitt," he said evenly, "trade deficits are a function of comparative advantage and mutual benefit. In 1988, the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement spurred growth on both sides. Since then, billions of dollars in investment and job creation have anchored millions of livelihoods." He paused, meeting her eyes. As Hannah Arendt observed, the trouble with lying is that it's less convincing than it seems. The facts do not lie, Ms. Leavitt, and insults do not change them. A hush descended. Leavitt's cheeks flushed crimson. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Aides averted their gazes. Others scrolled their phones, searching for any salvageable talking point. The audience exhaled. Reluctantly, applause trickled in, damning approval of Carney's measured triumph. In the days that followed, coverage dominated headlines worldwide. The Globe and Mail labeled Carney Canada's defender on the world stage. U.S. outlets were split. Fox News called Leavitt's insult a bold stance, while the New York Times decried it as needlessly provocative. Wall Street and Bay Street economists penned op-eds praising Carney's data-driven poise. On TikTok, a Toronto barista's reenactment of Carney's comeback, set in a coffee shop, went viral, racking up over 20 million views in 2 days. Behind diplomatic lines, the Canadian embassy in Washington circulated a carefully worded statement. "We thank Mark Carney for clarifying the depth and value of our bilateral relationship." Leavitt's office issued a terse memo defending her as a staunch advocate for American interests, ignoring Carney's statistics and historical context. Notably, a March 2025 phone call between President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau, previously unremarkable, acquired significance. Carney's spokesperson revealed that Carney had personally pushed back on Trump's 51st state rhetoric. News outlets seized on the detail. Carney was not merely a former central banker, now he was a political heavyweight. Back home, Canada reacted with swift solidarity. A Pew Research Center poll in April 2025 found that 70% of Canadians viewed the United States less favorably after Leavitt's comments. Coffee shops in Toronto and Vancouver buzzed with talk of standing up to the U.S. Emails flooded MPs' inboxes. "Thank you for defending Canada," one read. "When can I volunteer for Mark Carney's campaign?" read another. Hashtags, #CanadaStrong, #CarneyForPM, appeared on napkins and social media alike. 1 year later, the ripple effects remained. Carney had launched Northern Light, a weekly podcast on global economics. It debuted at #1 on iTunes, praised for its measured approach. Guests ranged from Nobel laureates to grassroots organizers in Saskatchewan. Carney insisted that policy be rooted in people's lived experiences, not political theatrics. At the annual G20 launch in Toronto, Carney quoted the 13th century Persian poet Rumi, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." The line resonated. Even after the harshest rhetorical battle, reason and respect could rebuild alliances. Leavitt's star, by contrast, began to fade. Advisors cautioned against her brand of unfiltered bravado. She accepted a role at a conservative media network, hosting a weekly commentary show. But her trademark quips felt forced, her viewership declined, and financial news panels often reminded her of Carney's retort. "I underestimated him," she admitted on air one evening, voice uncharacteristically subdued. "He knew the numbers and I didn't." In academic circles, Leavitt versus Carney, rhetoric, data, and diplomatic consequences became a case study at Harvard's Kennedy School. Professors praised Carney's data-driven diplomacy and used Leavitt's misstep as a cautionary tale. Students debated, was Leavitt's remark a calculated gambit or an uncalculated risk? Professors taught that in diplomacy, carelessness can unravel decades of goodwill in a single sentence. By late 2026, U.S.-Canada trade tensions eased. Aluminum tariffs were gradually lifted, aided by lobbying from Canadian energy firms and U.S. environmental groups advocating cross-border clean energy cooperation. Carney's Northern Corridor initiative, aimed at integrating electric vehicle supply chains from Ontario to Michigan, received joint funding. At the ribbon-cutting of a new battery plant in Windsor, Ontario, Carney declared, "This is not about who's bigger or stronger. It's about who's smarter and more united." Even longtime skeptics nodded in agreement. Yet Leavitt's legacy remained defined by that one line. In diplomatic training, spokespeople rehearse their responses. Do not insult allies. Always be prepared for a smart rebuttal. PR firms cited her clip as a caution. Check your facts. Never belittle your partner on a global stage. In a cozy cafe in Halifax, a university student named Mia scrolled through her phone, chuckling at a decade-old meme. Side-by-side images of Leavitt's smirk and Carney's composed gaze, overlaid with "When you underestimate Canada, Mark Carney shows you the numbers." She tapped share with the caption, "Never underestimate the quiet one." The annual Transatlantic Policy Forum continued each year, but no speaker again dared repeat Leavitt's misstep. Administrations changed. Global challenges shifted from trade to climate, from security to pandemic recovery, yet Carney's response endured, immortalized in speeches and classrooms. His reputation as the quiet assassin outlived transient headlines. He embodied the principle that measured facts and respect wield more power than bluster. On a crisp autumn morning in Ottawa, Carney joined an international peace delegation in Hiroshima. Standing at the cenotaph, he bowed his head, recalling how a single remark had thrust him into international politics. He whispered, "Words carry power, sometimes even more than weapons. May they always build bridges, not burn them." In Washington, Leavitt, now a commentator known for a softer tone, read those words in the afternoon news. She closed her laptop and exhaled, a mixture of regret and admiration. She had learned the lesson every politician eventually faces. Raw bravado may grab headlines for a heartbeat, but only reason, respect, and truth endure.